Okay, I've got a couple pieces here. I just took a wire wheel to that edge to clean them up. I'm going to go ahead and butt them up against each other, which is a tiny bit of a gap, about probably a 32nd of an inch, or maybe a 16th of an inch gap in there, just to show you what I'm going to do here with the wire feed weld. Go ahead and set my camera up here. I'm going to tack on one end, and then weld it up to the start on the other end and weld back to my tack. So I'm hoping it'll show pretty well in the camera here. Trying to keep my welder out of the way. So my goal is to keep the welder 90 degrees this way, so I'm not welding into either side too much, and I'm going to be doing a push motion, which means I'll be welding kind of angled, pushing towards the direction of my weld. If a pull motion would be if I started up here and welded this way. So just to show you here, and get my gap reset, and I'll do a couple tacks here, or one tack I should say, to hold it together. Get this down a little bit. There's some sitting a little crooked. Want to make sure they're nice and flush with each other. So just a little bit of a gap. I'm going to go ahead and tack it on the top there. I make sure my gap doesn't open up too wide here. Together just a hair. So I'm going to weld starting down here, weld back up into my tack, and hopefully the camera seems to be a little out of focus. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and weld starting down here, weld that way. I want my stick out to be less than this, about right now it's probably sticking out almost 3/4, so I'm going to cut her back down about a little over a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and weld that. Moving fairly quickly. This is pretty thin steel. Got my welder set, pretty lightly, but alright, so I'll show you here. Nice clean weld, nice and even. In the back side, if you look really close, you can actually see the weld in through the gap. You can see the root of the pass. I'm going to go ahead and try and break this and see if it'll actually break, so you can see the weld itself. We'll see how that goes. I'm just going to clamp it to the edge of the table here. Try to move that. Okay, my phone doesn't fall off when I pound on this thing. And we'll see how this goes. If I welded it correctly, it'll actually bend the metal a little bit as I try and break it. But it should break fairly cleanly if I have it clamped down well enough. If I have it clamped down well enough. It opened up a little bit, but it didn't actually break, which means my penetration is probably pretty darn good. As you can see, it warped it just a little bit just from pounding on it, but so that's basically, I know that weld isn't going to break. It bent the steel before it actually broke the weld, so it's a good quality weld. I don't have full penetration on this piece, but you're not going to on most pieces this thin unless you're really welding heavy. I'm purposely turned it down a little bit so I wouldn't just burn right through on my keyhole on the gap in there. So I'm going to do a lap pass next. I need to grab a couple more pieces here. That's wrapped already. So these pieces actually have a bevel. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but so there you can kind of see there's a flat edge on the top and an angled edge right here, an angled face, and then there's your top. The same with this piece. So what you would normally do is put those two beveled edges together. They should be really similar, if not perfectly the same. These pieces I am just going to do a lap weld, which I'll put them together like this. So you've got actually two lap weld passes that you can do, one on the back and one on the front. So I'm going to go ahead and tack this together like so. I'm going to push down on it pretty hard while I'm tacking so it doesn't warp or change the gap. I'm going to tack it down in this corner and then go ahead and tack it up in this corner. Okay, so when I weld this, I'll turn it like this so you guys can see. I'm actually going to do a little bit of a pull, which means instead of if I start my weld over here, this is a push angle. On this one I'm going to do a little bit of a pull angle, or a drag angle. So I'm going to start on this end, weld towards this side. So I want to make sure my weld covers the entire face of this top plate here and actually overlaps over that top edge. So as you can see, my stick out fairly low. I'm going to go ahead and start and weld all the way through in one shot here. So nice and smooth. Make sure you finish on the end. You want to hold it just a little bit on the end of your weld to make sure you have good coverage on your stop. So you can kind of see, I should bring the phone down here so you can see the edge of that weld. If it'll focus. Come on, there we go. Okay, so as you can see, it's all the way up on the face of that plate. I've got a little bit of undercut right in there. It's kind of hard to see on the camera actually. There we go. You can see it right there. There's some undercut. The rest of it looks pretty decent. It's a nice solid weld. Might have been a little heavy on that top plate. I probably could have turned up my wire speed a little bit to get better coverage. But as you can see, it's welded together. I'm going to flip it over. So I'll show you a technique here in a lap pass. I want to make sure that wire gets right down into the root of the weld. So you want to keep that wire pointed right where the plates meet up the whole way as you're welding, to make sure that you have good penetration right on the root of that weld. Otherwise you're going to have a weak spot in that root. It'll actually create a little air gap in there, and that's where your weld is going to break most times. So we'll go ahead and weld this side quick. This one I'm not going to do a brake test on. I know it will not break. It would take me all day beating it with a hammer to try and get it to break. So this one I'm going to do a push, just so you can kind of see. You might be able to see a little bit of a difference. That last weld, as you can see, it's a really rounded crown. The crown is actually the top part of the weld here. This one is very rounded. I'd like to see it a little bit flatter faced. So kind of just almost like creating a 45-degree angle in between that with just a little bit of a bump in the middle. That's what I'm going to try for this side with a push angle. I'm going to start on this end, but I'm going to push it towards that end instead of dragging it like I did on the last one. So there we go. Okay, that wasn't my smoothest weld. As you can see, there's a little bit of a ripple pattern to it. I mean, it wasn't very steady when I welded. Didn't quite cover the top plate. I never did turn up my wire feed, but it looks pretty solid. It actually melted into the plate the whole way. It didn't really undercut it. It just kind of has a little bit of a weakness to it. But get my focus going back here. Okay, so as you can see, it's not quite as round faced. It's a little bit flatter weld, so it looks a little cleaner with that push angle. But that is the basics of wire feed. You want to keep your steady pace. If it starts to burn through, speed up a little bit. If it seems to be, if your weld puddle kind of overruns your wire as you're going, you'll want to speed up a little bit. But if you can't even see your weld puddle, then you're probably moving too fast. But I'll do another video, show a few more basics here next time.